So I've got my sort of sketch, my loose sketch, and I'm mixing up here some raw sienna with the phthalo blue. I'm also mixing up some burnt sienna, a pinch of Paynes grey, and a little bit of that raw sienna. So it's kind of an earthy colour for the reflection here in the water. It's quite muddy almost. So I'm painting this wet on dry. I'm really kind of disciplining myself just to paint once and not overwork things. Rinsing my brush there, just diluting the bottom part of that there. You can see the reflection's darker and then it gets really pale in the water. I'm mixing up some yellow now with a little bit of quinacridone gold with a touch of that phthalo blue. And I'm just sort of painting wet on dry here, just painting sort of brighter colours using a large mop brush. I find using larger brushes sometimes really loosens you up, especially when you're painting landscapes. So mixing up here burnt sienna with the phthalo blue, so it's a really dark green, and I'm painting this damp into wet. That's where I can see some darks, and I'm doing that just at the bottom of those grasses as well. So to the side where you've got some green, and also at the bottom of the grasses, sort of pushing it into the damp paint just beneath, but also it's wet on dry just above there, and sort of varying the colours using the burnt sienna with the Paynes grey to make the grasses, the darker part of the bottom of those grasses, just a little bit darker. I'm just going in to that raw sienna again. You can use yellow ochre. I'm painting wet on dry, but also pushing it into the damp dark paint just beneath. So it's sort of getting that lovely sort of grassy, earthy colour. I've added some yellow to that as well, just to brighten it up. You don't have to use the exact colours. And I'm painting damp into wet with the tip of that large mop brush. You can see it really kind of spreads, and I'm tilting and using the bottom of the brush as well to allow some of that dark to drift into that raw sienna with a pinch of yellow wash. So using that kebab stick, you could use a cocktail stick or your twig, and I'm sort of scratching in, not sort of scratching the paper, but just manoeuvring that wet paint to create the look of thin grasses. I'm painting wet on dry the foreground, just sweeping strokes with that large mop brush. A little bit more of the burnt sienna with a pinch of Paynes grey. So just sort of getting the marks there, but keeping it really sort of loose. Loading my brush with that green there, that's the yellow with a pinch of phthalo blue and a touch of the raw sienna, wet on dry. Mixed up a darker green there using perhaps a bit of quinacridone gold and phthalo blue, painting wet into wet, just for some darker grasses on the edge. Just softening some of the edges there, using a little bit more of the ultramarine just to paint a little bit of blue in the water, not that I can see any in the photograph, so a little bit of artistic license there, but allowing everything to run down and blend. I'm just mopping off here where the paint ran a little bit too much. I want to create some light here in the water using my paper towel. Mixing up some more of the phthalo blue with quinacridone gold using my size 4 brush, painting some darks here, damp into damp, on the edge of the grasses and also on the edge of the grasses to the left hand side of the painting. I'm mixing up here a little bit of quinacridone gold with a pinch of phthalo blue. Touch more of that phthalo blue with the quinacridone gold, and I'm painting using the belly of my brush, this sort of medium and darker green. So it's at the top of the grasses. So some of the areas will be damp, and I'm sort of pushing some of that dark paint into the grasses there so you get that light against dark. I am sprinkling some salt on the grasses here. It's just table salt, and I'm going to allow that to dry naturally so it'll create light textures. And I'm using a watercolour pencil here with sandpaper, and rubbing the tip of the pencil against the sandpaper, the pigment falls onto the damp surface. A little bit more dark just here and there, using my size 4 brush, creating some more grasses in the foreground here. I'm mixing up a very dilute red mixed with burnt sienna for the rooftop here, painting wet on dry using my size 4 brush. I've added a little bit more burnt sienna there, damp into wet, and I'm sort of blending that. I think it's a good time now to allow your paintings to dry naturally. So I am mixing up ultramarine and burnt sienna, and I am painting wet into wet with my size 10 round brush. You can see it's very wet because it's really running down. Mixing up a little bit more ultramarine with a pinch more burnt sienna to the top left there, tilting, allowing the paint to run. And I'm actually pinching the brush hairs there to allow that puddle of paint to run into that sort of more blue-grey colour there. So it's a really lovely atmospheric sky. So just keep tilting to allow your paint to move. If it dries, just spritz it finely with a spritzer bottle just to re-wet it. I'm actually pinched some more paint the top left-hand corner there with my brush hairs. And that's more ultramarine with a pinch of burnt sienna, so more of a blue-grey. And I'm just sort of tilting it as well, sort of upwards and downwards just to get things happening. So again, I've mixed up more of a dilute ultramarine with a pinch of the burnt sienna. I think I've contaminated that with a little bit of phthalo blue. So oops, not quite the colour I was intending. But this is sort of a cloud bank just going towards the horizon. So I'm tilting it sideways, up and down, using this wet brush. It's the same consistency as the sky, and I'm just softening it so you don't get that hard edge there. Just carefully going around the trees and the houses. I wanted the light of the house to stand out, so I'm just using my size 8 round brush, using a mixture of the ultramarine and burnt sienna, and I'm painting damp into damp just around the house so it sort of stands out a little bit more, sort of mid-tone against light. And I'm adding and squeezing a little bit of the ultramarine and burnt sienna there from the side and just allowing it to drizzle into that damp wash there to create another cloud bank, to create interest. I'm sort of literally painting for my imagination, because if you look at that sky, it's completely grey. And this way I'm creating more of an atmospheric, more interesting sky. So as you can see, tilting and not touching the painting at all, hardly at all. So I'm painting in a window here using the tip of my size 4 brush with a mixture of the ultramarine and burnt sienna. It just creates a little bit of interest, some windows there, brings the white building to life. It doesn't have to have too much detail. And as you can see, I've actually used an artistic license because it doesn't actually exist in the painting. I'm just adding some burnt sienna with a pinch of red to the rooftop to the side there. Again, a little bit more artistic license. Adding a little bit of shadow to the right there using a dilute ultramarine and burnt sienna, and painting around the edge of the house as well, just to bring it forward away from the sky and to create some shadows underneath the eaves as well. I'm just adding a little bit more dark to the sort of left-hand side of the windows there, just to create some more depth, and a little bit more to the right-hand side of the house for shadow. I'm mixing up here some burnt sienna with a little bit of ultramarine, more burnt sienna than ultramarine, and just painting a few grasses wet on dry here and there in that field. A little bit of Paynes grey with burnt sienna. I just wanted some darker grasses. I'm painting it wet on dry. I thought it'd be quite nice to have a little spatter of yellow here and there. So I'm just using my size 4 brush and just mix up a puddle of yellow with a bit of the raw sienna, just spattering in the foreground as well, using my paper towel to protect the sky. I thought it'd be quite nice to actually spatter some of that yellow along the horizon as well, a little bit sort of a balance to the focal point of the house. I did actually get a bit carried away, and as you can see, I've got lots of yellow spots in the sky. So rather than trying to remove them, I just sprinkled some salt over that area, and hopefully it will sort of create some light textures along with those yellow spatter to look like wildflowers. I'm just mixing up here burnt sienna and ultramarine, again using a paper towel to protect the sky area, and I've spattered there in the foreground, wet on dry. I didn't like it, and I'm lifting off with my paper towel, but leaving some of the residue behind, and it looked quite effective. So you could try that out so it's not so dark. And I'm just finishing off with a few more darker grasses just here and there. And one final spatter here in the grasses in the foreground using that dark puddle of ultramarine and burnt sienna. And I've removed the washi tape now to reveal a lovely white border, and I've decided to leave the painting as it is. The thing I'm most pleased about was the spatter of yellow by accident in the sky, which I had to then add a little bit of salt, and it's just created some life in the painting and sort of movement. Which I'm really pleased about. So I really hope you find this inspiring and that you'll have a go at maybe painting from this photograph or one of your own. If you would like to get access to this extended tutorial, it is available on my Patreon membership. Just click Patreon in the description below. You'll also get access to my exclusive tutorials and downloadable outline sketches, and you can cancel anytime. Thank you so much for watching this tutorial. Happy painting. Bye for now.